Above a dark cauldron, a single drop slowly descends. If I told you that drop holds 700 years of time, would you believe me? The first liquid to flow is around 70 proof, yet the place we choose to stop is 45. Today, let us follow the quiet story held inside that single threshold. Amber Andong Soju rests in the glass, and beside it, the small number 45 sits with quiet poise. Korea has many soju, but very few stop at this exact number. I am sorry. And today I would like to gently unfold for you the oldest face of Korean distilled spirits. Before we lift the glass, let us trace together the long road this drink has traveled. The starting point of this drink is not the Korean peninsula. In a 13th century Persian workshop, scholars were refining the art of gathering vapor and condensing it into a single drop. They called it arak, and they were deeply enchanted by the concentrated fragrance held inside that single bead. This very technique of distillation would one day become the distant ancestor of Andong Soju. The people who carried this technique all the way to Korea were unexpectedly the Mongols. After conquering Persia, the Mongols held the method of arak in their hands and rode east until they reached the peninsula. The distance from Persia to Andong is more than 10,000 kilometers in a straight line. Doesn't it feel quietly astonishing that a single craft was carried that far on horseback? In 1281, the allied Goryeo and Yuan forces set up camp in Andong as they prepared to invade Japan. The Yuan soldiers brewed strong distilled liquor right there for their own military use. Even after the war ended, that craft remained in the kitchens and fingertips of Andong. The one thing the Yuan army left behind was the technique of distillation. And that is exactly where Andong Soju took its first step. There is also another story softly passed down in Andong. King Cheongyeol of Goryeo is said to have stayed in Andong for nearly a month and learned the art of brewing directly from the Yuan people. No one can confirm this with full certainty, yet one thing is clear. At that time, Andong was the first city on the peninsula where distilled liquor truly settled into everyday life. When Goryeo gave way to Joseon, the flow of Andong Soju never stopped. Joseon scholars often poured Andong Soju into white porcelain cups when welcoming honored guests. The fragrance held in the glass and that soft spice on the first sip suited the quiet aesthetic of these scholars beautifully. And so Andong Soju lingered gently in the corner of daily life for nearly 700 years. Yet there was a time when Andong Soju could not be made in Korea at all. In 1965, the government enacted a law called the Grain Management Act, which prohibited the very act of brewing liquor from rice. The decision was meant to redirect scarce rice toward food after the war. But what stopped along with it was the 700-year breath of Andong Soju. Old breweries were locked shut, and the hands that once cultivated nuruk were quietly set down. Between 1965 and 1987, a long silence of 26 years drifts by. In some kitchens, the spirit quietly survived as a home brew. But in the marketplace, the name Andong Soju had truly disappeared. Could a drink that a single city had guarded for 7 centuries really sink into such a deep silence? And that time passed slowly and heavily. Breaking the long silence on May 13, 1987, the brewing method of Andong Soju was designated Intangible Cultural Property. Note 12 of Gyeongsang-bukdo. Master Jo Okwa was recognized as the holder of the craft, and from 1990, the spirit was finally allowed back into the market. The single thread of breath cut off in 1965 was rejoined under the name of Cultural Heritage in 1987. That 26-year gap is now resting quietly inside every sip we drink. Now let us step a little closer into the glass itself. The ingredients needed to brew Andong Soju are surprisingly only 3. Steamed nonglutinous rice, finely crushed nuruk, and clear water. When these 3 are kneaded by hand in a ratio of 3 to 1 to 2 and laid into a fermentation jar, a single-stage rice wine slowly ripens for 13 to 20 days depending on the season. The numbers seem simple, but 700 years of touch are gently dissolved inside them. Once the rice wine has finished its breathing, it is time to place the sojutgori on top of the cauldron. The vapor rising from inside the pot meets the cool inner surface of the sojutgori and condenses into a single drop in that very moment. That tiny drop hanging at the end of the spout is in truth the first appearance of Andong Soju. The sojutgori may look like a simple tool, but it is the most honest device for drawing the line between vapor and water. The first liquid that flows from the spout is close to 70 proof, which is quite strong. As the heat continues, the liquid that follows grows gradually softer. And inside this very flow, The smallest secret of Andong Soju is hidden. The instant the proof reaches 45, we quietly stop the distillation, because that single point is the threshold where fragrance and flavor meet in their most poised balance. That is why traditional Andong Soju is a spirit that stands precisely upon the number 45. After traveling the long road, we have returned once more to the glass. A single thread of craft that began in a Persian workshop passed through the hooves of Mongol horses and arrived at the Andong garrison of 1281, vanished for 26 years, and woke again in 1987, now resting quietly in the glass before you. If a single sip can hold 700 years of time, then surely no sip can ever feel light. When you lift your glass today and gently recall this long journey alongside me, I would be quietly and deeply grateful.